You're watching Strat News Global. I'm Amitabh Revi, and we're joined all the way from Juba in South Sudan by David Shearer. He's the United Nations Secretary General's Special Representative and the head of UNMISS, the United Nations mission in South Sudan. Mr. Shearer, thanks so much for your time again. It's good to see you after about, a year and a half?
It doesn't seem like that long, but it has been, yes.
It has been, and so much has changed. When we last spoke to you in the same office, Mr. Shearer, this was January 2019, I think. Since then, so much has changed. I mean, there is a transitional government. Dr. Renk is back. There is a coalition government. There are 5 vice presidents. There are ministries that have also been laid out. But there is still a sense that things are going extremely slowly in terms of the timelines of the peace process. What's your assessment?
I think you're right. I mean, I think on the one hand, we look back and even back a year, and Dr. Renk at that point was not in Juba. He was still in Khartoum. We were wondering when he was going to come back. He's now here as of Feb.
And if he was going to come back,
he said he was going to, but there was a lot of obstacles put in the way as we went along. So now he's back, and as you say, there's been a number of things that have happened. There's the transitional government that's in place. We've got states. We reduced the number of states from 32 down to 10, and then in amongst that, they've now got governors for each of those states, with the exception of one, and things are moving on. But as you quite rightly say, very slowly, and peace agreements like this need to have momentum really moving along, and at the moment it's a bit slow. As a result of that, what we're seeing is a lack of structural elements. The county commissioners level, which is below the governors in the field, they are not yet in position. Now, they play a really important role in making sure that any violence or any conflict that could happen gets nipped in the bud quickly. As a result of them not being there, it's contributed to the localized violence that we're seeing so much across South Sudan.
So would you agree again with the assessment that political violence may have gone down, but there is still a lot of inter-ethnic violence? If the figures are to be believed, 1,500 people have been killed this year.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the political violence between the main groups has pretty much come to a standstill. We're nearly at a 3-year mark for a ceasefire, which is largely held. There's a couple of holdout groups which are creating problems still, but the most of the violence now is at a tribal level, if you like, but often fueled and stoked by national actors. So there's still an element of the national level affecting the local level. But I mean, I think we also have to remember, although all violence is bad, it's of a different scale to what it was a few years ago when 1 million people moved into Uganda. 300,000 or 400,000 people took refuge in Sudan. We're not seeing anything like those numbers anymore.
So in that sense, is what UNMISS has started doing and proposes to do in a larger scale in terms of your POCs or your prevention of atrocities against the civilian, the camps, when you are trying to transition them from your static peacekeeping soldiers there or troops there to the South Sudanese government, is that in keeping in line with the larger, what you're talking about, the lessening of violence in and around those camps?
Exactly. So the 5 large camps that hold up to about 160,000, 170,000 people are in urban areas. And in these urban areas now, the amount of violence has reduced very significantly. The violence we're seeing at the moment is more intercommunal violence, which is happening in very rural areas. And so what we're trying to do now is to move from, exactly as you say, the static protection activities that we're doing is basically protecting a camp, if you like, protecting a square, and using those same troops to move out to these other areas where we're seeing intercommunal violence continuing. that transition, I think, is appropriate now. We will still obviously have a mandate to protect civilians, which will encompass those people inside the camps if anything should happen. But what we're doing in terms of the transitioning now is saying these camps are no longer under total UN responsibility under international law. They should transition so that the government and the government security forces, the police in particular, now become responsible for law and order. And that's very much like the more than 1.5, 1.6 million people who are displaced across the country. It puts them in the same category as them. So it means that we are shifting gear here in UNMISS and moving to where we are most needed, as opposed to where we're not really needed, which is patrolling those camps.
So you're saying a shifting from protection of civilian camps to more like the more conventional IDP or internally displaced persons camps. Has there been any resistance, whether it's from the South Sudan government or from NGOs, to this move?
There's been some nervousness right across the board. I mean, I think the government's been very supportive. Some of the humanitarian agencies have expressed some concern. They say, is this the right time now? And obviously the IDPs, the displaced people inside the camps themselves, are saying, look, we think it might be a bit early. But in our judgment, we did a pretty thorough security risk assessment of the threats that are facing these people. And we sat down and worked out with the humanitarians, basically on a week-by-week basis, how we were going to move ahead. It's important to note that just because we move out of these camps, it doesn't mean the camps will close. Humanitarian services will continue. People are able to stay there. We have signed a memorandum of understanding with the governor of each of the states where we've had these camps, so that they understand better what their responsibilities are, and at the same time they understand what we're going to be there for and where we will step in should there be any problem. But I have to say, so far, that it has gone through extraordinarily smoothly. And we're just taking it step by step, place by place, because each place has its own dynamics. And we won't transition any place where we think there's still potential for violence on a large scale, as we saw in 2013 and 2016.
So like you're saying, Mr. Shearer, it's a process of transition, it's step by step. So South Sudan is extremely far from getting those people in the POC camps to actually move back to the areas from where they have come from. And one of the reasons cited is that maybe most of the people in the POCs are from the internal opposition areas and they can't go back. Is that an assessment that you agree with?
It's a bit of a mix. For some of those people, they can't go back to their homes because some of their homes, there is this conflict in the rural areas. For some others who are living close to the towns where they are, whether it be in Malakal or Juba or wherever, some of their homes are being occupied by other people, and so they are unable to do that. But for many others, they are able to move back. What is the biggest factor which prevents or stops people moving is the lack of services in the villages that they want to return to. So in the camps, their children have the opportunity of education. If they go back to their villages, in many cases, there isn't that same opportunity. And so, as any parent would, they want their children to be educated, so they stay where they are, even though they desperately would like to go back to where they come from and lead a normal life rather than being, crammed in under plastic sheeting with so many other people. But they get those benefits. Also food, medical facilities, etc. So it's a bit of a mix in terms of the reasons why people are holding back. And then obviously for some of them, they want to go back, but being in a camp means they don't have the resources to go back. And what we're doing at the moment is asking UNHCR to say, is there any way in which you can help those people who voluntarily would like to return, can we support them in their desire to get back home?
You said one of the reasons why you are doing this transition is to free up the number, which is, of course, broadly fixed in terms of your peacekeeping troops, to move to areas where they're needed more, where there's more violence in the outlying areas. But one other thing I think that's not changed in the last year and a half or more is that there are still restrictions in peacekeeping troops freely moving, whether it's government restrictions or government side or from the other sides. That's something that you've been worried about for quite some time.
Yeah,
right?
That's an ongoing obstacle we have here, and as you rightly point out, it comes and goes. We went through a very bad patch around in and around the COVID time, where we think that perhaps COVID restrictions were being used to prevent us from moving. It's a difficult one because on the one hand, we're also very wary of the fact that we don't want to be moving around when the rest of the population can't. And there always is a risk of spreading COVID or actually contracting COVID ourselves amongst our troops. So we did tighten things down. That's changing now. And as of the last month or so, the last few weeks, we're now able to move much more freely. And that coincides with the dry season coming on here in December. That'll run for the next 6 or 7 months. And the dry season is when we need to move mostly. The rainy season, the roads prevent us from moving anyway. So we will try and move more freely. There has been, as you say, some issues. But what we would like to do is to do more what we call, what our force commander, who's a very accomplished Indian general, 3-star general, is wanting to do, is to put people on the ground in areas across this South Sudan, in temporary type of bases where we can use this as a hub and then do hub and spoke operations to try and bring down the temperature with these intercommunal violence. And where we have done that, and particularly where we've been able to get in there early, I know we have been able to reduce the conflict and save lives. Now, you can never tell how many lives you would have saved of people who haven't died, but absolutely getting in there early has a massive impact on our ability to save lives across South Sudan. And in addition to that, prevent and stop a conflict from spiraling out of control in so many other ways, preventing humanitarian activities happening, perhaps the destruction of schools and health clinics, a whole bunch of things is prevented from happening as a result of that getting in early and doing those, putting in those temporary bases.
You talked about the force commander, Lieutenant General Tinaikar, and the spoken hub deployment of troops. Last time we talked, you also mentioned the Indian peacekeeping battalions, which have been rotating there, and their great work. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in Renk, the Indian battalion, again, this time around, helped a lot when NGOs were possibly being attacked. Am I correct in that piece of information?
No, absolutely. That's exactly right. They did a really excellent job. There were riots in Renk. It was some problems around recruitment, of bringing in outsiders rather than using local recruitment. Mobs went out on the streets. They burned down one NGO base, and many of them took refuge in the Indian peacekeeping forces base there, along with the World Food Programme. And we were able to protect those people, get them out later on, but most importantly as well, protect some of the food in the World Food Programme warehouses that were adjacent to our base. So they played an excellent role in that. And we had a lot of compliments from NGOs who are often not very free with their compliments towards peacekeepers, saying thank you very much for helping us and looking after our people. They really did appreciate it.
Again, when you were mentioning the restriction in movement of the peacekeepers, you were talking about COVID and how that had affected people in the last 8 months or so. I believe rotations have not been taking place as they have normally for the peacekeepers from across the United Nations board for the last 6 months, but those will probably start now in November?
Exactly right. I mean, we had a lot of problems, and we asked our peacekeepers, even though many of them were due to rotate out. I mean, most peacekeepers come here for 6 months, or most of them come for more than 12, or for about 12 months. We got to the point where we just couldn't get flights in to take these troops out or get their replacements in. And so as a result of that, many of the troops ended up staying for much longer than 12 months. And we were really appreciative of that, the fact that they stayed on, even though, they missed their families and everything else, and carried on like that, because it meant that we were able to continue doing our job when we couldn't get their replacements in. By the end of this year, the backlog would have been cleared. We're a little bit behind as of now. By the end of December, I think we should be back right on about target for everybody to rotate according to what the original schedule was.
And another thing that you would probably be very disappointed with, and I did see the report that you gave to the United Nations Security Council, I think the last one was in September, if I'm not mistaken, is in terms of the timetable and the transitions that are supposed to be in process, is the security mechanism. Now, there was supposed to be joint training, and that whole process is also extremely slow. Is that because of lack of money, lack of will? Or what?
It's all of the above. This is you're absolutely right. I mean, the situation here. There's a political track which, and we went through that before about the appointment of governors, the ministerial posts, etc., etc. There's another path as part of the peace process, and that is the unification of the forces from both sides. In general, one side, the government side, has pretty much stayed in their barracks, and the opposition side have been cantoned into cantonment set sites, and then they were meant to transition into training sites, which many of them have done. But from the training sites, we have not had any graduations out and brought into this unified force. Now, that's serious, because young men, many of them armed, inside training sites which are lacking food and tents, all the various things that is needed in a training site. That lack of progress generates frustration, anger, and risks going back into violence again. So we have pushed very hard on the government, as has EGAD, the organisation, the regional organisation here, to try and move that process on. But at the moment, it's both, I think, a lack of will. Certainly, there's a lack of resources, and often the case where resources which have been available not going to the right place. So it's a combination of those factors. We're working closely with the government to help them with that, to embark on a strategic security review, looking at absolute numbers of the military, officers, command structure, etc. But at the moment, we're not really getting too much willingness to engage in that sort of activity. So it's something where we're still pushing on.
And there doesn't seem to be too much willingness even on the political track, in terms of there is frustration, at least from Dr. Riek Machar's side on certain points, from the government side on other points. How frustrating is that to work with in terms of, is there like no timetable for the United Nations, for the international community? Do they just let this process continue on and on if there is no political will on the ground?
Well, EGAD, the organisation, the regional organisation, did set up some benchmarks earlier in the year in July or August. Unfortunately, they have not been respected, and the timetable is still very slow. I mean, I meet with the principals, the president, Salva Kiir, and Dr. Riek Machar. We talk about the timetabling. We are from the rest of the organisation down. We are pushing as much as we can to make sure that this moves at the right speed. It's moving, and that's the frustrating thing. It's, on the one hand, you can't say that if you look back a year, you can say, actually, there's been a lot accomplished. On the other hand, when you're sitting here thinking, why can't this move faster? Because it's not moving faster. We're seeing these localized conflicts breaking out, a lot of frustration, which is fueled by the lack of progress often in the peace process. And if it moved a bit faster, we might avoid some of this localized conflict. I sit here in my job sometimes, and I pull my hair out, which is why I'm lacking here at the moment. That's the reason, and trying to get things moving a bit more quickly. But as I say, you can look back and say, well, we have moved, and the enormous violence of the past has died down. It's just that we've got other problems in addition to what we had before.
And on the judicial track, I do remember when we were reporting from South Sudan, there were a lot of mobile courts that you had set up that were working, and they have been since then as well. But I'd asked you this question then as well. In terms of reconciliation, say truth and reconciliation, like what happened in South Africa, is that something that is left for down the road in the peace process as to holding accountable people, and not necessarily on the ground soldier level, but right at the top?
Well, on this issue, actually, there's been some pretty good news. With regard to the mobile courts, they went through something of an abeyance during the COVID time when people couldn't move around. But in the last couple of months, we've started to reinitiate those. And one of the great advantages of not being so involved with these POC sites, where we had police officers in there all the time, because we also had the responsibility of policing it, is that now we're looking at moving those police officers to support law enforcement right across South Sudan. And in addition to that, we're doing some work with the magistrates, the prosecutors, and even the Ministry of Justice. We believe that we can grow that very quickly. And I have to say that the South Sudanese are very eager for that sort of support and that help. Now, if that happens, what we've seen with the mobile courts, and these are just courts that go into a particular area and stay there for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. They try the backlog that is there in that area, and then they move on to somewhere else. But if we can have more permanent presence in those places, then we're going to see justice being implemented in a much more systematic way. And I believe it will start to address the real problems of impunity that happen across South Sudan. So when somebody carries out a rape, for example, of which there's way too many here in this country, and they are caught and they're brought in and people are tried and they go to jail, it sends a message right across the entire system. And I'll tell you, give you one anecdote. I mean, there was just a few months ago, one of my colleagues was up in Benchu where the mobile courts were functioning, and a young woman, about 15, had been raped by 4 men. They had been identified, they had been brought in, and they came into this court very cocky, very arrogant, as if this wasn't going to be a problem. And they saw this woman standing there in this court, and they saw the witnesses around her that were willing to give evidence, and their faces fell, and the courts found them all 4 of them guilty, and they got sentences between 4 years and 12 years in prison. Now, that sent a shockwave through that area to say, if you do this, you're not going to get off. And so that's what we're trying to do now, Nitin, is to start moving, when we're moving out of the POCs, using our substantial police presence to have more professionalism in the police, but also across the justice chain, so that we're able to affect more change. I think it's a terrific next step, if you like, along South Sudan's path along towards progress.
Mr. Shearer, you mentioned about the peacekeepers and in fact how they would probably, the backlog of their rotation, you would catch up by the end of the year. I do believe you yourself, because of the pandemic, have been in South Sudan for what, the whole of the year, and you might just be able to get a holiday and go home for the Christmas and New Year vacations?
Yeah, so I'm kind of hoping on that. I'm from New Zealand, so an adversary of India on the cricket field. But yeah, I'm hoping to get home in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Unfortunately, we have a 2-week compulsory hotel quarantine. We have to be separated from everybody. Yeah, so it'll be a little while before I can get out to see my family and maybe catch a game of cricket at the same time. But but I'm really looking forward to it. It's been a tough year this year, I have to say. Not only for me, I mean for everybody across our staff. And we've had the force commander, for example. He's been here pretty much full on. The Indian battalions that are here, the engineers that are doing work on the Indian engineers that were doing work on the roads here, incredibly valuable work to allow people to be moving more freely. And the signals group, they unsung heroes of South Sudan, the group here that are in every single location that we have, and they send the radio and the messaging from where they are into our headquarters here. They've all done a great job, so they deserve a serious break in the upcoming weeks.
And till you get that break, I can, I think, share a little secret with you before you go on a holiday that the Indian ambassador could possibly invite you soon for one of your favorite dishes, which is an Indian biryani. So till you get that break, maybe
he's been threatening that for a while. So I'm really looking forward to it. So yeah. He's a good guy here and a very big supporter of the mission. And of course, with India going on to the Security Council in the next year or so, it's going to become even more important to have that backing. So we've got a good relationship here. As long as we don't mention cricket too often, because it just seems that it's more often than not the Indians beat us rather than the other way around. So yeah.
David Shearer, the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General in South Sudan and the UNMISS head, thank you again so much for your time, for taking out time to give us this interview. It was a pleasure having you on Strat News Global yet again.
Thanks very much. Anytime, and it's great to talk to you as well. All the very best. Thanks.
You've been watching Strat News Global. I'm Amitabh Reddy.